Welcome to our continuing series on questions and answers from the works of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. Today's subject is psychological perfection from the Mother. The 5 psychological perfections. Someone asked me what was this psychological perfection that the champa flower symbolizes. There is not one psychological perfection, but 5, like the 5 petals of this flower. We have said they are sincerity, faith, devotion, aspiration, and surrender. But as a matter of fact, every time I give this flower, it is not always the same psychological perfections. It is something very fluid, depending on the circumstances and the need of people. In any case, the first among the 5, that which is always there in all the combinations, is sincerity. For if sincerity is not there, one cannot advance, not even by a half a step. But it can be translated by another word, transparence. Let me explain. When I am in the presence of a person, I look into his eyes. And if the person is sincere or transparent, I go down into him through his eyes. I see his soul clearly. But, and this is precisely the experience, it happens at times that I see a little cloud. I continue. I see a screen. I still continue. And sometimes it is a wall. Then it is something absolutely black. And you must pass through all that. Have to bore holes in order to enter. Even then, you are not sure if at the last minute you will not find yourself before a bronze door, so thick that you may never pass through, and it may be impossible to see his soul. In that case, I can say immediately that the person is not sincere. I can say also, in a more literary way, that he is not transparent. This, then, is the first thing. There is another which is evidently quite indispensable if one wants to advance. It is faith. You can use another word which looks more limited, but for me is more important. That is to say, trust. Because it is a question of experience. If your faith is not made of a complete trust in the divine, you may easily keep the impression that you have faith and gradually lose all trust in the divine power or divine goodness, all trust in the trust that the divine has in you. These are the 3 stumbling blocks. First of all, there are people who assert that they have an unshakable faith in the divine. They say, it is the divine that is doing everything, can do everything. All that happens in me or in others, everywhere, is the work of the divine and his only. But if they follow their thought with some logic, they will begin after a time to accuse the divine of the most frightful misdeeds, of all the evils happening in the world, They will make of him truly a demon, cruel and frightening, if they do not have trust. Or otherwise, they do have faith, but they say, "Yes, I have faith in the divine, but this world, I know well what it is. First of all, I suffer so much. I am very unhappy, much more unhappy than all my neighbors, for you are always much more unhappy than your neighbor. Indeed, life is wicked with me, but then the divine, being all goodness and generosity and harmony, how is it that I am so unhappy? He must be powerless. Otherwise, being so good, how can he let me suffer so much?" This then is the second stumbling block. There is the third one. I speak of people who have what might be called a wrong or excessive modesty or humility. They say, "Surely the divine has rejected me. I am good for nothing. He can do nothing with me. I have only to give up the game, for he finds me unworthy of him." Then unless you add to your faith a total and complete trust in the divine grace, you shall have difficulties. Now, devotion. It is the third among the psychological perfections. Yes, devotion is very good, but unless it is accompanied by many other things, that too may go very wrong and meet with much difficulty. You have devotion and you keep your ego, and your ego makes you do all kinds of things out of devotion, and things that are terribly egoistic. That is to say, you think of yourself only and not of others, nor of the world, nor of the work, nor of what has to be done. You think only of your own devotion, and you become formidably egoistic. And then you find that the divine, for some reason or other, does not respond to your devotion with the enthusiasm that you expect of him. You despair and fall into the three difficulties of which I spoke just now. Either the divine is cruel. We have read a good many stories of the sort about devotees who abuse the divine because he is not as kind and as near to them as before. He has withdrawn himself. "Why have you abandoned me? You let me fall, O monster." Perhaps they do not dare to say that, but they think like that. Or otherwise they say, "Oh, I must have committed such a serious blunder that I have been rejected," and they fall into despair. So the devotion must be accompanied by another movement, that is, gratitude. This feeling of gratitude that the divine exists, this gratefulness full of wonder, this truly fills your heart with a sublime delight, because the divine exists, because there is something in the universe that is the divine. And there is not merely the monstrosity that we see, because there is the divine, because the divine is there. And each time any least thing puts you in contact with this sublime reality of the divine existence, your heart is filled with so intense and wonderful a delight Such gratefulness as is of all things the most delectable in taste. Nothing can give you a delight equal to that of gratitude. You hear a bird singing, you see a flower, you look at a child, you witness an act of generosity, you read a beautiful sentence, you stand before a sunset. It does not matter what the thing is. All on a sudden it comes upon you, a kind of emotion, but so deep, so intense, because the world manifests the divine, because there is something behind the world, which is the divine. So I consider that devotion with gratitude is wholly incomplete. Gratitude must also be there with it. Next comes the fourth perfection, aspiration, which can be translated also as courage. It is a courage that has the taste of a supreme adventure. This taste of supreme adventure, that is aspiration. The aspiration which seizes you entirely and throws you without calculation, without reserve, without the possibility of a withdrawal toward the great adventure of the discovery of the divine, the great adventure of meeting with the divine, the still greater adventure of realizing the divine, and you throw yourself into the adventure without looking behind, without asking even for a minute what is going to happen. Because if you ask what is going to happen, you never start. You remain with both the feet planted on the ground, there fixed in fear of losing something, losing your balance. That is why I speak of courage, but in truth it is aspiration. It is the two together. A true aspiration is a thing full of courage. Now the fifth perfection, surrender. Sri Aurobindo tells us that surrender is the first and absolute condition for doing the yoga. Therefore, it is not merely one of the required qualities, it is the very first indispensable attitude for commencing the yoga. If you are not decided to make a total surrender, you cannot begin. But to make your surrender total, all the other qualities are necessary: sincerity, faith, devotion, and aspiration. And I add another one, endurance, because if you are not able to face difficulties without getting discouraged, without giving up under the pretext that it is too difficult, if you are not able to receive blows and continue all the same, to pocket them, as it is said, you receive blows because of your defects. You put them into your pocket and continue to march on without faltering. If you cannot do that with endurance, you will not go very far. At the first turning, when you lose sight of the little habitual life, you despair and give up the game. The most material form of endurance is perseverance. Unless you are resolved to begin, the same thing over again 1,000 times if needed, you will arrive nowhere. People come to me in despair, but I thought it had been done and I have to begin again. And if they are told, but it is nothing, you have to begin probably 100 times, 200 times, 1,000 times, they lose all courage. You take one step forward and you believe you are solid. But there will be always something that will bring about the same difficulty a little farther ahead. You believe you have solved the problem, but will have to solve it again. It will present itself with just a little difference in its appearance, but it will be the same problem. Thus, there are people who have a fine experience and they exclaim, "Now it is done." Then things settle down, begin to fade, go behind a veil, and all on a sudden, something quite unexpected, a thing absolutely commonplace that appears to be of no interest at all, comes before them and closes up the road. Then you lament, "Of what use is this progress that I have made if I am to begin again? Why is it so? I made an effort, I succeeded, I arrived at something, and now it is as if I had done nothing. It is hopeless." This is because there is still the I, and this I has no endurance. If you have endurance, you say, "All right, I will begin again and again as long as necessary, 1,000 times, 10,000 times, 1,000,000 times if necessary. But I will go to the end and nothing can stop me on the way." That is very necessary. Now, to sum up, we will put at the head of our list surrender. That is to say, we accept the fact that one must, in order to do the integral yoga, take the resolution of surrendering oneself wholly to the divine. There is no other way. It is the way. Next come the 5 virtues or psychological perfection: sincerity or transparency, faith or trust, devotion or gratitude, aspiration or courage, endurance or perseverance. There is another form of endurance. It is faithfulness. To be faithful. You have taken a resolution and you are faithful to that resolution. This is endurance. If you persist, a moment will come when you have the victory. Victory is for the most persistent.